I am hoping to lay the groundwork a little bit on what we know by the numbers. So I'm a data person, so I'm going to talk data. I think numbers can be really important. They're most important for telling us what questions to ask, but they don't necessarily tell us the answer to those questions. I am going to use the terms that the federal government uses because fundamentally I am a bureaucrat, I guess, by nature. And so I'm going to use the terms Hispanic or Latino interchangeably because this is how they're reported in those categories, understanding that this is language that has been changing around this category and how we're talking about it. Roughly 1 in 11 North Carolinians is Hispanic or Latino. That was the total estimate of the population as of July 1, 2018. So we're going to be over 1 million probably today. And when we look at growth rate, what's really interesting is North Carolina, I think we understood our Latino population as being among the fastest growing in the nation over the past few decades. And in part because the Latino population is so sizable now, we're actually not among those darkest the darkest blue categories there. We're, again, just missed the cutoff for 25%. We're at 24.6% growth since 2010, which is faster than the national rate of 18 percentage points. But again, we're not growing as rapidly in this population as some of the other neighboring states, as well as the Dakotas and Montana, where that's where you're getting very small populations can grow very quickly. So we're starting to look a little bit more like states with well-established Latino populations. In our largest counties, we also have the largest communities of Latino residents. So about 1 in 4 North Carolina Hispanic residents are in either Mecklenburg or Wake County. And you can see kind of the corridor of the highway system a little bit on that map. But when we think about where the Hispanic population has the greatest impact, we're really going to see a very different map. So keeping in mind about 9% of Hispanic residents, of North Carolina residents are Hispanic. When we're looking at places like Montgomery, Lee, Greene, Sampson, and Duplin, that's over 15%. I think in Sampson it's about 21% right now, and that's up from 2% in 1990. Latino immigration patterns have influenced across the state. This is a rural and an urban phenomenon, and these groups are very much influencing many of our smaller communities that may have experienced population losses if it hadn't been for population growth in this group. 2010 marked the first real year that the majority of North Carolina's Hispanic population was US born. So a lot of, part of this set of slides that I'm showing you has been developed because I realized when I would go out and I talk about population change and migration, the number one question I got was people would say, but yeah, kind of dance around a question that suggested that their understanding of the Hispanic population in the state was recent immigrant, primarily undocumented, English as a second language with less than a high school education. And I think it's very important to understand that this has been a dynamic and changing population that has been growing for almost 30 years now. And it has a lot of diversity in that population, but most importantly is majority US born and in many cases North Carolina born. In our state, much like the United States, Mexican is the most commonly reported ancestry. 11% of our Hispanic population report Puerto Rican, and that in part reflects a strong influence of our military bases. We have many Hispanic residents who serve in our armed forces in this state. But we also have a very high proportion of Salvadoran, Honduran, and Guatemalan at higher rates than we're seeing in the national Hispanic population. So we have a larger influence of Central American residents in this population. When we look at specific place of birth by Hispanic residents who moved here from a foreign country, again, we see Mexico is the leading destination, followed by El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. Keep in mind that this is not a homogeneous population. There's a lot of diversity, and that diversity is both from Central America as well as parts of the Caribbean and South America. Our Hispanic population is in prime childbearing ages, which means that we're seeing the influence of those migration patterns in much greater detail in the child population. So while 3% of adults aged 55 to 64 are Hispanic, 16% of children under 10 are Hispanic. So overall, we have 370,000 Hispanic children in the state, and 93% of those children are US born. So when we're talking about the Latino population in our schools, we're primarily talking about a second generation population. This does not mean that they are not migrant children, but that their experience of immigration may be by being in mixed status households or through their parents' status. Across the board, we are still seeing that our Hispanic students, their educational outcomes are lagging the outcomes of other students. So when we look at high school graduation rates, this is the most recent data, so this is graduating in 2019. 81% of Latino ninth graders who began school in 2015 to 16 completed within 4 years. That's 6 percentage points lower than the statewide rate, on par with American Indian performance, but lower than any other group. 83% of all high school graduates said that after graduation they planned on going to college. That proportion was 74% among Hispanic students. And among Hispanic students, they're more likely than any other group to report intentions to enroll in a community college. So fewer than 4 in 10 high school graduates immediately transitioned into a post-secondary institution the fall after graduation, compared to 57% of all high school graduates. But I think it's also important to know that when students do enroll in post-secondary, we see very strong outcomes among Hispanic students, actually higher overall graduation rates. 45% of Hispanic students who start a post-secondary program after high school complete a degree within 6 years, which is actually much closer to the overall average than some of these other outcomes. So what we're seeing is that if we can get these students into post-secondary, completion rates are actually very high. If we look just at people who don't have an associate degree or higher, that's 3 in every 4 Hispanic children live in a household where no adult has a college degree. For some of these children, they may be serving as translators for their parents as they're interfacing with the school system. So we have among Hispanic children in the state, 4% live in a household where the parent does not speak any English. Another 17% live in a household where the parent speaks English but not well. And another 20% in a household where the parent speaks English well.